Hello, welcome to the News in 5 for February 2023. I'm Peter Martin, president of Gosselin Martin Associates. It's the first News in 5 we've done in quite some time, so welcome back. I'm happy to get it rolling in this late February morning. The News in 5 will cover 5 stories. We will look at the market, then we will look at the organization, and then we will give a career best practice. So the News in 5 is meant to encapsulate the month that was in healthcare facilities management. Story 1, the market. We hear a lot of stories from candidates, both for jobs we recruit for and just in general, people calling in and wanting to talk through some of the issues that they have when they interview for jobs. And there's 3 stories in the past month that I think are illustrative of a market that is still in some chaos, some turmoil, and will continue for the foreseeable future. I talked to one gentleman who told me that he's been applying to jobs. He's applied to 5 jobs over the past year, and he's a person who's well qualified. He's worked in healthcare facilities management. He's getting a little frustrated in that he said the jobs that he's heard of that have been filled that he's gone for, it's going for people outside of healthcare facilities management. And he's getting a little bit disheartened by that and wondering what's going on. Talked to another person who has been with their employer for quite some time and felt that he was underpaid and talked to me about that and wondered what I thought. And I thought he was as well. And tried to talk to the organization and they wouldn't necessarily do anything for him. Felt bad, but we're not going to budge. And then I spoke to another gentleman who had been applying for jobs, and he would apply to HR departments. And again, I tell this story only to recall to bring light to the fact that everybody's overwhelmed, including human resources. And for one of the jobs that he was interviewing for, ultimately ended up interviewing for, the person he was interviewing with told him, geez, I wish I had seen your resume earlier. And he said, well, I did apply. I applied to human resources 3 or 4 months ago. And human resources had never passed along the resume to that individual who was doing the hiring. And I tell that story not to be critical of human resources, but just to stress that human resources is stressed just like everybody else. And so, as I say all the time, if you don't get a reply for a job, don't take it personally. There's lots of issues that are could be contributing to that. And so you just got to keep plugging along because the market is a little bit chaotic and it's going to continue to be. And I think these 3 stories kind of illustrate different areas of where the market is and what you may be experiencing. As always, we're recruiting for some roles. We filled a couple recently, but you can go to the goslinassociates.com/jobs to see the roles that we are recruiting for currently. Story 2, the organization. I was thinking with the folks that we recruit for, with the organizations that we recruit for, who does the process well? And when they do the process well of recruiting for a candidate, what do they do? What's the commonality that organization exhibits during the candidate recruitment process? Because again, as I've said before on this, candidates are assessing you just as you are assessing them. And these days, it's even more important to treat them well throughout the process, to value their time. And I think a couple of things that organizations who recruit candidates well during the recruitment process, what do? The first thing is they communicate. They communicate before, during, and after, and that's key. And sometimes even, the communication can be even, we don't have a decision, but we're still in the phase of assessing. So good organizations communicate. They don't go cold because, again, on the candidate side, when they don't hear, sometimes they flee. Other times they're just thinking, geez, what's this organization about? So they communicate. They also reply in timely fashions if they can, As we've said, good candidates are a valued commodity, a valued person. And so the timeliness is really, really important. I think the other, another factor that good organizations do is they treat that employee as though they are wanted. They kind of woo them. Again, not with, what do you hear? Like lavish credit cards, but they just treat people as though, you know what, we want you here. And that can be everything from, when somebody shows up in your lobby for an interview, you're there to greet them. Again, we've heard of situations where candidates sit in the lobby waiting for somebody to get them. That shows that we want you. Being on time, if they're there for a lunch interview, they're there for a full day, you serve them lunch, you just make them feel welcomed. And it's nothing elaborate. It's just kind of basic human interactions. And again, these are all things that don't always happen. You may be sitting there saying, yeah, my organization does this all the time, but not everybody does. I think the other one that's really interesting is allowing candidates time to make decisions once you give them an offer. And I know that's an interesting one because, you need to fill your role. It's been open. And I've seen organizations go both ways. I've seen some organizations that really allow that candidate to think it through and go, and they've really allowed the candidate to make a detailed decisions, where there are other organizations that will sometimes say, you got 2 days, and if you don't do it, then we're moving on from you. I think that's a little extreme, especially these days. I know that sometimes organizations are always worried that the longer you go, maybe you're out there comparing us to somewhere else, to someplace else. Maybe you're trying to leverage us for another job. And that's all fair. I understand that because, hey, that happens too. But there are candidates who are really good, who do take the time to think these things through, and they need to talk to their family, especially if they're relocating from a different part of the country. So I've seen organizations that are quick to say, you got to give us a yes or no, or we're moving on. But I think, when I've seen organizations that are effective in it, they allow that thought process. And especially these days, I'll say it again, everything's changed a bit, and candidates are much more, I don't want to say thoughtful, but it's not as easy as it was kind of, pre-COVID to just get up and move. There's definitely a change, in that regard. So that's something to consider. But I was thinking about that, those 4 things. Organizations that treat the candidate well, I think they communicate in a timely fashion. They make that person feel welcomed. They try to woo them, and they give them that time allowed to think things through and come to decisions. So that's the organization. I would give a pitch now. Hopefully you're listening to our high reliability podcast. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, on our website. But we release 2 a month relative to the world of healthcare facilities management, just specific to healthcare facilities management. Our latest was released last week with Jordan Smith from down in Florida, a director of FM at Advent Health. Last story, career best practice. This is one, this is a career best practice that is a good intention that can sometimes go wrong. So it's a candidate who has a good intention and it's a good thing to do, but the execution of it can sometimes counter that good thing. And what I'm talking about is the thank you note. I will see, the handwritten thank you note is always good. I don't always see those. Candidates don't always, obviously they don't put them by me, but occasionally I'll get CC'd on an email that a candidate, and these are for jobs that we're working, that a candidate that we're working with, they apply to an organization, they get an interview, and then they email that organization back, which is a really good thing, right? They thank them for their time, they reassess their interest, and they move on. They don't have to be long, they don't have to be elaborate. But I will tell you that sometimes when I get those emails, and I'm CC'd on them, what can kind of sometimes hurt me is that I will see in the email either punctuation errors or informality used. Sometimes I can tell that it's kind of written quickly. And so I guess I would just say, if you're sending a thank you email, that is a great thing to do. But if you're going to do it, you need to make sure you take the time to do it and that it's not quickly done. You want to make sure that your punctuation, your spelling, and listen, I'm not perfect on this stuff either. I use Grammarly to try to catch me. So I know none of us are perfect, and I'm not coming from a place of perfection on this because I'm just as guilty as everybody else. But the glaring ones, the punctuation, the lack of capitalization, the informality, and the informality is the one that you can sometimes catch. It just and you're like, ah, man, I wish you'd just taken a little bit more time because you did a good thing. That thank you note is good because it can separate you. As you know, in today's world, manners, they're not out there in abundance, to be quite honest. And that's one thing I always try to stress with my kids and everybody I work with, use your manager, please, your thank you, because it's a good thing and it can definitely set you aside or apart, especially during the interview process. But if you are going to do it, please make sure that you think it through. And it doesn't, when I say think through, it doesn't have to be long. Think through with, just don't make those easy errors that say to that organization, there's some informality here. Because again, they're assessing you. They're assessing you on everything you send them. And I was going to conclude the news in 5. Thanks for watching. But I just want to say one other thing. I thought of this, relative to our second story today. We were talking about the organization. One other thing about candidates, when you're hiring somebody, a director of healthcare facilities management, and this is in regard to giving them the time to think. As you know, good healthcare facilities managers, they use numbers, they assess everything, they're detailed. And I think sometimes you see that in their decision-making process, that detailed oriented, where they're going to crunch the numbers, they're going to assess infrastructure, they're going to look at everything. So you need to allow that, because again, the person you're recruiting in healthcare facilities management, a good person or a good person in the role is that detailed oriented person who doesn't just jump, and they take time and they assess. So that was the final point I wanted to make on story 2, the organization. I'm Peter Martin, president of Gosselin Martin Associates. As always, I thank you for tuning in for the February 2023 News in 5. Have a great day, and thank you for tuning in.